Learning to draw can be a challenge at any age. But if when we start, we're older, say over 50s, then it can have been a long time since we last did anything quite like this. Let me share some really practical and helpful ways to think about to understand the whole learning to draw process. And also some very specific ways that I think we can really understand and organise the actual drawing sessions when we first start this. Organised to take advantage of solid learning principles that I have seen the benefit from in my own drawing experience. And I was 60 when I really started drawing. First, a few general mindsets. The first is stop planning to start and just start. I don't need to wait for a better time. I need to use the time I'm in now in the best way I can. It's only when I start that I discover what I think of as my natural starting point. Our natural starting point is different for all of us, and it comes from the total accumulation of all our life experience one way or another. And the sooner we come to understand what it is, the sooner we can start to develop our drawing from that point. It's quite possible, if we did art in our youth and we've been thinking about it our whole lives, that at some point, people have told us, and we've thought ourselves, that we have some talent in this area. But right now, as I start to learn, it's very helpful, I think, to disregard all thought of talent and to focus on the fact that I'm learning a skill. And whatever point I start from, I can improve in this skill. It can be helpful to reflect on how I've learnt skills in the past, whether it was learning the piano, learning to play football, to get to a place of being able to do something that I couldn't do at the start. Because the things, the methods, the mindsets, the attitudes that were helpful with those will be helpful as I work at the skill of learning to draw. A really important point to remember is that learning anything is a skill in itself. And sometimes when we're older, we actually haven't had to work hard at learning a new skill for a long time. And if this is the case, I'm not just learning to draw, I'm actually learning to learn again, or at least to improve my learning to learn skills. So it's another reason to be a little bit easy on myself at the start. But just as we will get better at learning to draw with practice, we will also get better, faster, more efficient at learning to learn, which will fast track the whole process. So now some quite specific strategies for how to actually organise and implement our learning sessions, our drawing sessions. Firstly, very importantly, a fundamental learning principle is that overall we learn more faster by learning smaller steps, simpler steps really well before we move on to more complex ones. It's better to learn to do a simple thing well than to do a more complex thing less well. In one, we learn the skills of doing something well. In the other, we learn the skill of not learning something properly at all. Now, when I do a course, it's the teacher or the actual course outline that paces me in this way, that sets appropriate things for the level I'm at. But if I'm on a self-taught drawing journey, and I presume that's the case if you're watching me on a YouTube video, then it's easy to get carried away with enthusiasm and start to try and draw subjects that really are too complex for where we're at to have any chance of doing them well. Perhaps I feel the urgency, the need to make up for wasted decades where I didn't do anything. But from a learning point of view, from a skill learning point of view, it is simply not going to be helpful or productive to start at the end. Because when I start to learn by drawing simple things well, I'm actually making it easier to learn a whole range of skills that I need to develop simultaneously in anything I draw, whether it's a simple thing or a complex thing. It's easier to develop my new skill of observation that I will need to have when I draw, because how I observe something to draw it well is different to how I observe something for, if you like, everyday life purposes. When I draw, I'm looking at something, whether it's in a photo, in real life, or in my imagination, and I'm having to translate it from that form into another form via marks on whatever surface I'm drawing with whatever I'm making the marks with. It's a creative translation process that takes place. I'm not copying a photo, I'm translating something. I need to learn to think in this new way to work out what I'm going to do on the paper, what I'm going to put there. It's going to be easier to learn this translation work with a simple subject where there are less things to have to worry about than if I'm trying to translate quite a complex scene. I also have to learn technical skills, pen control, hand-eye coordination, the way certain pens make certain marks on the paper and how I can use those marks to create certain effects. Again, it's easier to start to get my head around the possibilities, the potential of any one pen or a pencil if I'm juggling less variables at once, because it's a simpler subject that demands less of me. So because there's less areas that I'm juggling in this simpler subject, it's easier to go deep, more thoroughly, more quickly in those areas. And I learn the skills I need to learn more deeply, more easily. And then I have a stronger base to stand on when I apply them into more complex subject areas. And we also get the confidence of simply having drawn something well, because it's easier to get a satisfying result with a simpler subject. One big danger, not so obvious at the beginner stage, is if we draw a scene that's just too complex for our ability to do well, we may not have enough ability even to realize that we haven't drawn it well. And so we do drawing after drawing of this type at this level, and in the end, we rob ourselves of the ability to actually see the problems that we need to overcome. That's going to make it very hard to improve in the future, because we've reinforced all of these poor habits. I think a very helpful point to take on board and understand when we start this drawing process also is that our learning is more session related than time related. And by session related, I mean a session of doing what we do in the skill. And so with drawing, it's starting and finishing a drawing. That's the session, that's the cycle. So there's more benefit from more frequent, shorter sessions than less frequent, longer ones. I will learn more effectively from 4 30-minute drawing sessions a week where I start and finish one drawing in the session than in 1 2-hour drawing session where I start and finish one drawing in 2 hours. Because with the shorter sessions, I have 4 cycles I can learn within. With one longer session only, I only have 1 cycle I can learn within. Again, you can see how simpler subjects make it easier to do a shorter but completed drawing cycle in a shorter period of time. Therefore, multiplying the drawing cycles, the learning cycles, the amount I can learn. And so it becomes clear that it's most helpful if I finish my drawing in one drawing session from a learning point of view. Part of the reason we do this is there is a rhythm, there is a tempo in a drawing from start to finish. And we want to let that tempo develop and to experience it and to learn to use it. And we don't do that if we keep interrupting the tempo because we interrupt the drawing progression from start to finish. And a further reason why it's so helpful to complete a drawing in one session, whatever the length of the session, is that if we don't, in practice, we can often end up with a lot of half-finished drawings, because when we start a new session, it can feel more exciting to start a drawing than to finish one that we've already begun and that perhaps we can already see some problems with. And yet there are skills we learn in the second half of a drawing that we don't learn in the first half of a drawing because we don't need them until the second half. And if for every 10 drawings I start, I only complete 4 of them in a second session, then my finishing a drawing skills are not going to be developing in a consistent way with my first half of a drawing skills. Another great benefit at the start of our drawing journey that comes from doing simpler subjects is it becomes easier to critique our drawings after each session, and this is really important to do. I need to look at my drawing and say what's worked, what hasn't worked. Remember, if I'm on a self-taught learning journey, then I'm my teacher as well as my own student. And so as the teacher, I need to mark my work. I need to decide if it's good enough to go on or if I need to repeat it. And I need to give comments that will give me direction. It gives me guidance. It gives me a focus for what I do in the next drawing session. This next point's also extremely practical, and that's to stay in the groove. A good example of what I mean by this is probably what most of us did in our maths classes back in high school, where maybe we had a new chapter and it introduced a new formula, and we spent several weeks just working on using that formula over and over again in lots of different contexts for as many different reasons as we might use that formula. And then we moved on to another chapter with something else. But in the subsequent chapters that we did, we would often come back and use this formula that we've studied so intensely for a short period in some way. That's staying in the groove. And when we learn to draw, there are lots of particular objects that we draw because of the sorts of subjects that we want to draw. And it can be very helpful to stay with a narrow selection of objects for a set period. For instance, I started by drawing architecture and then I broadened that to streetscapes. And what often happened was that there were trees next to the buildings in the streets. Now, I'd painted trees for 10 years before I started drawing, so I love trees and I didn't find it very difficult to develop a style of drawing trees that, for me, seemed to work. But I noticed in lots of the drawings I was looking at that the trees were often the weak spot, and that clearly drawing trees hadn't had the same attention, the same focus, perhaps the same effort as had been put into drawing the architecture or the other elements in the street. Our drawings are going to be as weak as the weakest part of them. And so it's important that we work at all the sorts of subjects that potentially could be in a scene that we draw. For me, that was vehicles and people. By staying in the groove, I mean we work at a particular part, a particular element. So we might have 10, 30-minute drawing sessions on trees, on foliage. I'm just focusing on one particular part so that I can go deeper more quickly and fast-track improvement in that area. I might do 15-minute drawing cycles for just one area, such as a tree, and therefore I improve each cycle and improve my tree drawing a whole lot more than if I'm just drawing one tree in every 3 drawing sessions. Going from drawing trees to drawing horses to drawing portraits might be more interesting, maybe more entertaining, but it's not a good way to learn and to consolidate particular drawing skills to improve the way we draw particular subjects. I think it's very helpful in our first drawing sessions to draw smaller scale rather than larger scale. Firstly, it's quicker and easier to finish a smaller drawing. So if we're wanting to finish our drawing, to complete the drawing cycle each session, then a smaller drawing is going to be helpful for that. But a drawing that physically is smaller is also an easier drawing to look at, to see all the elements that we've created in one go, and therefore to critique. And we want accurate critiquing because we want accurate information to direct our next drawing sessions. Up till now, these points have been about starting to draw and basically seeing what comes out and ways we can improve on that. But what about getting ideas, ways of drawing things that haven't just come out naturally from within us? The first is that we spend time looking at the artworks that other people have drawn, particularly artworks in the same sort of area, subject matter of drawing. Have a look at a wide range of people drawing. People clearly from beginner stage to more expert. People who draw in all sorts of different ways using different techniques, so that I can work out what information might be helpful for me for what I'm wanting to do in my drawing. Using apps such as Instagram or Pinterest, look, there are quite a few now artists sharing apps, is a very helpful way of seeing this. As I'm looking at these drawings, I need to ask myself, why are they so good? What is it that's appealing to me? How have they done it? How have they created the effect that I'd love to be able to create? I need to look at their marks really carefully. What actual techniques of ink on the paper, pencil on the paper have they used? Because if they've had a pen and a sheet of paper, well, I have a pen and a sheet of paper. If they've learnt techniques, well, I can learn techniques. Once I come to understand the techniques they've used, then I can start to experiment with using those marks and incorporating them into the way I draw. So how exactly do we do this? How do we learn to use their marks in our drawings? Firstly, I don't recommend copying their drawings because copying is not a skill that we need to learn to be able to create our own drawings. It's just time lost. I may copy just a small amount of foliage to see what it feels like to try and make those marks myself using my own hand, my own pen on my own paper. But what I need to do then is to not keep copying their trees, but to find some photo references of my own of similar trees and seek to draw them using those sorts of marks, because now I'm putting it into my creative thought processes to produce a way that I now can draw this tree using those marks, using those techniques. I'm making that technique part of my creative thinking, and now I will have it there to use anytime I see a tree. Not copying their trees, but creating my own, inspired partly with their techniques. So doing this sort of thing is a great way to use our learning sessions. It's a great way to get a drawing cycle, albeit just with a particular part of a drawing. I'm not expecting an artwork at the end of a session. I'm not trying to get an artwork at the end of the session. I'm trying to embark on a learning experience that will be equipping me to be able to produce artworks. You can see that the idea of working with simpler subjects on a smaller scale in a shorter period of time is a great way of structuring my thinking and my drawing sessions at the start to accelerate improvement. And the other way, as a beginner learning to draw, that we introduce outside input is by engaging with teaching material that other people have produced. But particularly with videos, we need to be careful. Not all videos are going to be helpful for me. Not every teaching video on YouTube is necessarily good teaching. If I think back to school, I had some great teachers and I had some really ordinary teachers. Well, I had no choice then, but now that I can choose what I watch, I want to use the time as productively as I can. Some videos may be very entertaining, but if my purpose is to improve my drawing skills rather than entertainment, then that's not a good choice for learning to draw. And the last point I'll say on choosing videos is don't use videos of drawing demonstrations where you can't see the reference that the artist is using. It may look impressive to see a drawing appear from nowhere, but if I'm wanting to learn how to create my own drawings, the fundamental thing I have to learn is this creative translation process. When I see a photo and I work out what marks are going to create an effect that conveys what's in the photo or what I want to bring out of the photo. And if I can't see what's inspiring, what's feeding the marks the artist is putting on the paper in the video, I don't get to learn any of that process at all. The real skill is not the technical skill of actually putting the marks on the paper, but it's knowing what marks I want to put on the paper, where, for what purpose. That's the challenging skill to develop. And I get no exposure to that at all if I can't see what the artist is using. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope this has been helpful for you. And of course, 50, 60, 70, we're never too old to start. We're never too old to learn, to keep learning. So however old you are, wherever you're at in your drawing journey, whatever you're producing, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.